All right, wonderful. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Directors meeting of SACOG for Thursday, October 21st. Before we get started, I will let Lynette, our clerk, make any opening comments.
Thank you, Chair Gore. Good morning. Just a reminder that the meeting is being recorded as it was just announced, and then also it's being live video streamed on our website. As a reminder to our board members, we would ask you that you please mute your device if you're not speaking so that we don't have any crossover noise. And then also just a reminder for members of the public who might be viewing the meeting, if you'd like to make a public comment, you can do so two ways. You can send an email to our Deputy Clerk of the Board, rgarcia@sacog.org, and she will patch you into the meeting. Or if you'd like to submit a written comment that I'll read during the meeting, you can do that live to my email address, which is lespinoza@sacog.org. And both of those email addresses are on our website as well under our staff directory. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynette. And let's start with Pledge of Allegiance. And Director Gog, if you would lead us in the pledge, that would be great.
Salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. And Lynette, would you take the roll call, please?
Thank you. Director Baines?
Present.
Howdeshelt for Bernasconi?
Here.
Bradford?
Here.
Branscombe?
Yes.
Houlihan?
Here.
Burris?
Here.
Clark Kretz?
Here.
Desmond?
Here.
Frericks? Absent Frost? Absent Gallardo? Absent Gog?
Yes.
Guerrero? Absent Harris?
Here, good morning.
Joyner?
Here.
Kennedy?
Here.
Kozlowski? I'll come back to you, Director Kozlowski. I saw your name earlier. Lozano?
Here.
Middleton?
Here.
New?
Here.
Sander? Absent Saragosa?
Here.
Saylor?
Here.
Chenier?
Here.
Spokley? Stallard?
Here.
Soon?
Here.
Thomas?
Here.
West?
Here.
Director Kozlowski, are you there? I don't hear you. I'll mark you absent. Vice Chair Jennings?
Here.
Chair Gore?
Here.
And ex officio member Fong for Benny Paul.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lynette. We'll move on to public communications, and this is an opportunity for anyone to address the board on an item that's not on our agenda. Do we have any public communication, Lynette?
No general public communications this morning.
All right, thank you. We will move on to our consent agenda, the consent calendar. And these items will be taken with one motion unless we have someone who would like to remove an item.
To the chair.
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second, soon.
All right, we have a motion from Director, I believe, Baines, and a second from Director Soon. And I just want to make sure, is there anyone who wants to remove an item from the consent calendar?
Actually, this is Thomas. I would like to remove item number 7, please.
Item number 7. All right, do that. Thank you very much. And with that, we've got a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda other than item number 7. Lynette, do you need to take a roll call?
Sorry about that. Yes, I do need to take a roll call vote.
All right.
Thank you. Director Baines?
Aye.
Howdesheld,
Aye.
Bradford,
Aye.
Branscombe,
Aye.
Houlihan,
Aye.
Burris,
Aye.
Clark Kretz,
Aye.
Desmond,
Aye.
Frericks, absent Frost, absent Gallardo, absent Gog,
Yes.
Guerrero, absent Harris,
Yes.
Joyner,
Aye.
Kennedy,
Aye.
Kozlowski, absent Lozano,
Aye.
Middleton,
Aye.
New,
Aye.
Sander,
Aye.
Saragosa,
Aye.
Sailor,
Aye.
Chenier,
Aye.
Spokely,
Yes.
Stallard,
Aye.
Soon,
Aye.
Thomas,
Aye.
West,
Aye.
Vice Chair Jennings,
Aye.
and Chair Gore.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carried.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and take item 7, which is authorized request for proposals for pricing and incentives pilot research design framework. Sabrina Bradbury, if you could take that and share the information, and unless Director Thomas has any questions, we'll let you do that, and then Director Thomas can have questions.
So last month, the board approved an amendment to add this grant-funded project to the overall work program. The item before you is to request authorization to release a request for proposals and to delegate authority to the executive director to negotiate and execute a contract with a selected consultant. In case you missed last month's overview of this project, it did just go to the Policy and Innovation Committee, I believe. It was a partnership with SANDAG, the San Diego Association of Governments, and SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments, to jointly develop a common research design framework for pricing and incentive pilots. Given that transportation pricing is a broad topic with a lot of complexity, staff and partners see value in hiring a consultant or team of consultants that have expertise in planning and designing projects that focus on transportation pricing and incentives. The work will advance a pricing pilot that will test the idea of coupling mileage fees with incentives for using other non-drive alone modes of transportation. The results of this study will be useful for designing systems like a mobility wallet, where people could have all of their transportation options in one place and be able to access incentives for many different modes of transportation. Attachment A is a summary of the scope of work that SACOG and partners are refining to release an RFP. The consultant will develop a research design framework that can be used by all the partners and potentially even others in the state to launch future pilots in their respective regions. We are particularly interested in exploring how pricing combined with incentives could influence travel behavior, and we want to better understand the equity impacts associated with transportation pricing. So the consultant would develop a research design to determine things like sample size, establishing baseline travel data, and privacy protections associated with a pilot like this. They would also develop a technology design, what devices or technology are needed to launch a pilot like this, and then also participant information and interface design. How should the information be presented to best display all the travel options and incentives? What does recruitment look like for participants who are part of the pilot? And what sort of help desk features should be part of that user interface? The framework will allow us to test one of our hypotheses that if people are presented with current information about what they pay for different modes of travel and what their options are for avoiding costs of driving alone, that people would be more responsive to incentives that change their travel behavior to reduce vehicle trips and miles. And as we continue to coordinate with the state on a changeover from the gas tax to a road user charge, we know there's still a lot we want to learn about the impacts at the local level, particularly around equity and travel behavior, as I mentioned. And we'll be coming back to you to discuss pricing in various ways as we move through the update to the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy. And we'll also be reporting back on milestones of this project in particular. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Director Thomas.
Yes, thank you so much. And first of all, I have to apologize to staff. I hadn't noticed that this was on the consent calendar. I thought it was an action item. Otherwise, I would have reached out to staff ahead of time. I fully support this board item, but I wanted to ask the commission to consider this fact that as I was reading it, the staff report notes that the policy outcomes of this pilot project and this design research is to, number one, advance equity in underserved communities, reduce vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions, manage roadway congestion, and provide sustainable revenues. You'll agree with all of those policy outcomes that this pilot project, this research project is designed to study. Additionally, one of the focuses this pilot project is designed to research is to evaluate the impact of pricing on lower income households as well as rural residents. And that's what I'd like this board to consider is while all of those things are well and good, nowhere in this research design does it state that the pilot will work to establish transportation pricing and incentives that work within a rural model. Because what works in urban areas is going to be very different than what can actually work in rural regions. And we have to address rural transportation and advance policy that also works in these rural regions so we can obtain our goals most effectively. So I'd like the board to consider adding some language that actually works to establish a model that works in these regions.
Thank you, Director Thomas. Really appreciate that feedback because, and I don't recall, Sabrina, which groups we're working with. I know Washington, I think it was LA, SACOG, right? Areas that are more urbanized, and we do need to look at our rural areas. Director Joyner?
Yeah, I just want to say that as representative from one of the more rural areas, I fully support Director Thomas's recommendation that we craft some language to include within this that focuses on the differences between our rural commutes and the more urban and theoretically much shorter commutes that this so far seems to be focused on.
Thank you. Director Burrows?
Thank you. I just also wanted to echo the same request. As a representative of a very rural area in Placer County, the per mileage fees being suggested recently have definitely caused quite a bit of sticker shock for our constituents, and we would very much appreciate making sure there's language to protect them in there as well.
Thank you. Let's open this item up to the public if there are any public comments on this item.
Chair Gore, I don't have any public comments, but it did look like Director New might have raised his hand.
Oh, I might have missed that. Director New, yes. Go ahead, Director New.
I will also join in with my fellow commissioners in saying that as Winters is also a rural community with a small population and very few choices of transportation, that I just want to put my word in for the support of this thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Director New.
Yeah, I'd like to say something as well. It's Pamela. I don't have that hand raising thing on there, but I'm using another computer. But yeah, being from Isleton, it's about as rural as you can get. We're far from stuff. So yeah, we really need some of that. I concur with the board members.
Thank you, Director Bullenheim. Director Sin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support my colleagues' recommendations. I just have a question for staff, and I heard, Chair, I just heard you read the I'm sorry, my mouse keeps scrolling faster than what I'm trying to show here. The outcomes, but a question for staff, because I also see in here that the MPOs, the partnership will consider pilots that also consider low income, but also rural residents. And I was wondering if the intent behind that was to accomplish exactly what my colleagues were asking for.
Yes, Director Soon, I believe that, well, I know that is the intent. I think that we just didn't articulate it well, and we're happy to make an amendment to that to call out more clearly that in part of this pilot is figuring out how does this work in rural areas where people often are driving longer distances and don't have alternatives to driving. And so that is a big piece of what we're interested in figuring out is both low income, but rural communities specifically have very different land use and options for transportation. And how do we address that and make sure that this is not a regressive tax, if you will.
Perfect. Thank you. Glad to hear that.
If I may jump in, thank you, Board Member Soon, that I agree with that. And it certainly talks about evaluating the impact on lower income households and rural residents, but it doesn't talk about advancing policy that works within those regions, not just studying the impact of that. So I move that we approve this item with language that adds another policy outcome that will be to advance transportation pricing incentives that work within a rural model.
Clark Critz seconds.
Chair Gore, if I just I think as Sabrina Bradbury was just saying, Director Thomas, this actually is our intent. So maybe this is I appreciate the clarification. We're absolutely open to taking that language, because what we're trying to actually figure out is, as we transition as a state from a tax on gasoline to a tax on travel, not all the miles driven are the same. They have bigger impacts in urban areas. 50 miles driven in a rural area is not the same as 50 miles driven in an urban area. How do we provide incentives that actually send those signals, right? So that's our intent. Happy to take this friendly amendment and get on with the work. So appreciate your raising this.
Thank you so much. And feel free to be flexible with the language that works, but you understand the intent of this. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you for the discussion. Really appreciate it. And it makes it really clear to our SACOG team how important this item is to our communities. So we have, I think you understand the intent, and you can make sure we have the appropriate language included. And so we'll take a motion from Director Thomas, and the second is from Director Clark Kretz. And we'll go ahead and take roll call, please.
Thank you. Director Baines?
Aye.
Howdeshelt for Bernasconi?
Aye.
Bradford?
Aye.
Branscombe?
Aye.
Houlihan?
Aye.
Burris?
Aye.
Clark Kretz?
Aye.
Desmond?
Aye.
Frericks? Absent Frost? Absent Gallardo? Absent Gog?
Yes.
Guerrero? Absent Harris?
Yes.
Joyner?
Aye.
Kennedy?
Aye.
Kozlowski?
Yes.
Lozano?
Aye.
Middleton?
Aye.
New?
Aye.
Sander?
Aye.
Saragosa?
Aye.
Saylor?
Aye.
Chenier? Director Chenier, could you indicate your vote?
I'm sorry, aye.
Oh, thank you. Spokley?
Yes.
Stallard? Director Stallard, if you're still there, could you indicate your vote?
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Thank you. Soon?
Aye.
Thomas?
Aye.
West?
Aye.
Vice Chair Jennings?
Aye.
Chair Gore?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you. We will move on to item 8, which is our next generation transit. I'm going to pass this on to Chris Doherty. And We're doing the workshop prior to our action item this morning because this will sort of frame up the conversation about the next generation transit strategy. So with that, Chris, I'll let you take it away. You can introduce our presenters.
Thank you, Chair Gore. I'm going to give a brief presentation and then I'll hand it back over to James to introduce the presenters. Can everyone hear me okay? And let me share my screen quickly. All right, can everyone see the PowerPoint that is up? Perfect, thank you. Good morning. Again, this workshop is for the Next Generation Transit Study. And following this presentation, we will hear from two speakers from the Seattle area that James will introduce on how they've achieved that regional transit network and the history behind that. The Next Generation Transit Study began in last year, spring of 2020, and seeks to articulate that long-term vision for transit in the Sacramento region. This project brought together a diverse group of stakeholders through our Policy Advisory Committee and our Technical Advisory Committee to inform this process, as well as feedback along the way from the various SACOG committees and the SACOG board. To achieve the vision of that next generation transit in our region, it will require a shift in thinking and transit delivery to move away from moving buses and trains to moving people, and understanding and having a better understanding of what people and customers want. To do this, we'll need to do the following: offer frequencies, speed, and service spans that make transit more competitive with driving. Address mobility disparities for the disadvantaged, low-income, and transit-dependent populations of our region. Attract sufficient passengers to enable the sustainable and efficient land uses envisioned in the MTP-SCS. And leverage emerging technologies to enable seamless travel experience across urban, rural, and suburban contexts to be tailored to customers' needs. During the analysis of this study, three main findings emerged. First, transit trips in our region are long and slow, on average about 9 miles an hour, and on average about 60 minutes for a transit trip on average. The regional connections are difficult. If you are traveling from county to county, these trips are more complicated than if they have to cross over transit agency boundaries, excuse me. And these impacts more adversely affect the disadvantaged communities of our region, which make up approximately 38% of our region. To address these, we need a series of strategies that will be deployed regionally. First and foremost, we need the ability to speed up transit in our region. This, the data in front of you shows by mode, excuse me, how transit compares to other modes in our region. This was derived from the replica data that our data team uses, which is looking at big data, cell phone data throughout our region. This data here represents about the last quarter of travel data in our region. It alters a little bit from what I showed at the Transportation Committee because we updated the numbers to the last quarter of data. But the primary point here is if you look at the difference in speed between driving alone at 45 miles an hour on average versus 9 miles an hour for public transit, and the duration, a 16-minute drive versus a 64-minute public transit trip. This does not say that these are the same trip and that's the duration it takes to do that same trip, but these are the durations and speeds on average of the trips throughout our region. We need to get these numbers closer together to make transit more attractive and efficient in our region moving forward. To do this, we can do this through strategies like dedicated transit lanes, especially through congested areas, intersection queue jumps where the bus gets priority to move first before the vehicles at the traffic light, and more interim steps on our freeways like bus on shoulders or dedicated transit lanes on our freeways moving forward through our managed lanes. As I referenced earlier, our transit trips across the region are difficult. Many of our trips in our region are truly regional. If you live outside of Sacramento County, half the trips that originate in those counties end in a different county. So a large portion of our trips in the region are regional. This map, and I should explain it because there's usually some questions about it, illustrates the top 10 destinations that are not downtown Sacramento. Downtown Sacramento is still the top destination in our region, especially for commuting. But this demonstrates the truly regional way we move around our area. And currently, our transit agencies are kind of built on a county by county basis. And if your trip requires a crossing of that transit agency, it is usually a friction point and added time that makes that less attractive for the traveler, and more attractive to take a personal vehicle. To correct this, we are recommending that our transit agencies and SACOG facilitating this work together on more regional route planning. We've already had some successes in this. The services like the Causeway Connection that is co-operated by SAC-RT and YOLA Bus is a great example of the things that we need to build on and move into the future. We also need to focus on user experience. We'll need to, to create a different environment for our travelers. This can be done through integrated route planning to have all the transit agencies routing on a smartphone to simplify that travel would, would help. Mobility hubs to pair several mobility options at these end of trip services really help open up the options for those not traveling in a vehicle. And also co-branding strategies to have that visual cohesiveness throughout the entire regional transit system. We also need to prioritize the needs of our disadvantaged travelers and remove the barriers to their participation in the planning process. Really raise these voices in our region of those who are traditionally not part of that process. As I said earlier, this encompasses about 38% of our region. It is a large portion of our region. We need to rethink our transit delivery. A lot of our regional operators, several are moving in this direction now, most notably SAC-RT and their SAC-RT Forward plan and the latest efforts from YOLA Bus kind of come back to that concept of moving people, not vehicles or buses, focusing ridership on those areas where they, those corridors that support high frequency fixed route transit. So we see high ridership and moving that service to 15-minute intervals to move more people, but also looking at how we address those low density suburban areas that make up a large portion of our region. We've had tremendous successes with microtransit in our region, both in West Sacramento and SAC-RT. That's opening up in other areas as looking as a very successful mode of delivering transit to some of our areas. We need to find other ways of doing that and expand our options in our toolkit in this to better serve our traveling public. The innovation strategies really are the foundation to move forward on in the next generation transit study. Helping our transit agencies and SACOG move to more of a mobility broker model through our region. This is really thinking outside of the 40-foot bus to how can we more efficiently serve the people in our region. Is that through microtransit? Is it through autonomous vehicles in the future? How do we pair micromobility like bike and scooter share to our transit service for those end of trip services to leverage them better? And also integrated point-to-point route planning with integrated fare pavement. Imagine you're using your smartphone to plan your trip from point to point across multiple modes, having multiple options in front of you that vary in either time or cost, so that you can make a personal choice to meet your for your trip that day. All this with integrated fare payment, so it's all done through the app on your phone at one time. Make that as seamless and easy as possible. This concept is really the platform for future innovations of the future. Any new innovation in transit and mobility will be built on this platform, and we really need to move faster towards this if we're going to be ready for those next big ideas as we move forward. So this plan is a high-level framework that articulates a vision of where we want to go over the next 20 years. What is really the important part of this plan is how we implement it. And we as staff are already planning on moving forward that very, very quickly. We are looking at, in the next few months, initiating a regional transit network plan and speed plan to look at those two primary findings that we have found, which are how do we address those regional mobility needs of our region, and how do we speed up transit at the same time by a list of capital improvements that we can prioritize, whether it's transit-only lanes, intersection improvements, those things. We'll prioritize those and move those forward. Also, we're looking at a regional mobility hub plan. We understand mobility hubs can have a very different look and feel depending on the context of the land use that they are placed in. So a mobility hub in downtown Sacramento will look very different than one in Roseville or one in Elk Grove or in Galt. So we understand that, but we want to create that typology for a regional implementation of these so we have a successful platform to implement these in the future. And really, the underlying question mark on all of this work, since we've been doing this during the pandemic, is how will transit respond to the changing workforce needs post-pandemic? We've already initiated a task force with SACOG staff, representatives from the state offices, transit agencies, to discuss return to work planning. We are looking to expand this to incorporate representatives from the private sector and other workforce representatives for better near-term planning so we can help our transit agencies in this truly time of disruption in our mobility and to emerge better and be more ready as we move forward. So this concludes my presentation. I'm going to hand it back to James to introduce the speakers, and I believe we're going to be taking questions, comments after the speakers at this time. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and hand it back to James.
Great, thanks, Chris. And I think, as Chair Gore said, it's a little unusual today that we would be doing an action item and a workshop really on the same topic, but this has been an important priority for the board, actually, since your 2017 board retreat, and actually next generation transit really emerged out of that as a key priority for you all. It's been a constant topic in front of the Transportation Committee over the last 12 months, with a lot of really what I would call a very healthy debate about the future of transit in this region. So the workshop, as I'm going to set up right now, we're really delighted to have two excellent speakers from the Seattle region. We're going to start with a speaker from one of the suburban transit operators in the Seattle region, and then we're going to move to a speaker from the city of Seattle representing their Department of Transportation. Now, some of you might say, boy, I've been to Seattle. We're not Seattle. That's a huge city. That's a big top 10, top 15 metropolitan region. So I want you to think a little bit about this as we hear these speakers. And I talked to my peer up in the Puget Sound Regional Council, the Metropolitan Planning Organization up there, who said, I know Sacramento pretty well. I think actually where you are now as a region is a little bit, in some ways, where we were in the late 1980s and early 1990s. In terms of transit, in terms of a lot of things. And actually, interestingly, if you look at just population, the population of the Seattle Puget Sound region, our population today, in the Sacramento region, is about the regional population of the Seattle region back in about 1990. If you look at just the city of Sacramento, our population today in the city was about the city of Seattle's population in the late 1980s. We're going to hear from our next speaker who operates a transit service in Snohomish County, just outside Seattle. Over, I think, Rick, 800,000 in population. Back in the late 80s, around 400,000+. Seems a lot like Placer County, perhaps. So I'm not saying we're exactly on the same map and path and things aren't different between our two regions. But I will also tell you that the story goes, transit service was actually hitting a bottom in the 1980s in Seattle. And it was not just coincidence that we're bringing you these two speakers today, because they've had, before COVID, some of the best success stories in building ridership, transit ridership of any region in the country. That was not by accident. And so that's my setup. I'm going to introduce our first speaker first. He does have to leave at 10:30. So he's going to present, and we'll do a little bit of Q&A, if that's okay, Chair Gore, with Rick before he has to drop off. And then we're going to go to Sam Zimbabwe from the city of Seattle. So delighted to have two great speakers today. I'm just going to introduce, without further ado, Rick Ilgenfritz. Rick is the CEO of Community Transit, as I said, largely serving Snohomish County. I believe he's going to give us a map to orient us, just in case you're not frequent visitors to Seattle. Rick, I believe, joined Community Transit as CEO at the beginning of this calendar year, but has had a long history in transit, worked for Sound Transit, one of the transit operators in the Seattle region, worked in engineering consulting for quite some time, and has really, and I think now is really at the helm of a very important operator who, just like us, is rethinking a little bit of their service model. So Rick, we're really glad to have you here and delighted to hear what you're going to say.
Thanks, James. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. It's fun to see Sam. He's probably sitting a couple of miles away from me right now, which is always funny. Our two organizations work very closely together. Is the staff going to share the slides, James?
Yep, that's the plan. We have the slides ready to go.
Great. So as James said, I lead a suburban transit agency to the north of Seattle called Community Transit. We operate a number of modes. I was interested to hear the previous presentation about the focus on innovation. I think that's very important. I think the opportunity we have ahead of us is to begin to more precisely scale capacity to meet demand. So that's a really important principle to keep in mind when planning for the longer term. And I think transit agencies now have more options than ever to figure out how best to tailor their services to meet their community's demands. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about one of our modes, which is bus rapid transit. You'll see that BRT acronym a lot as you think about transit options. And this is a commitment that our organization has made to invest in bus rapid transit as the core capacity within our system. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got to that decision and how it fits in the regional context. So next slide, please. This is a map of the Puget Sound region. As James indicated, my organization serves Snohomish County, north of Seattle. Our metropolitan planning organization takes in 4 counties: Snohomish, King, where Seattle is, Pierce, where Tacoma is, and Kitsap across the Sound. We're about 3.5 million people aligned on a pretty narrow north-south axis, hemmed in by water on the west and mountains to the east. So our predominant travel patterns are aligned north-south. That's changing with growth, but it's been sort of the guiding North Star for transit planning and highway and transportation planning for decades. Figure out how to move people up and down along that north-south corridor. So as James said, we are about a little over 700,000 people north of Seattle. Our traditional service model has been to provide fixed route local service within our county and also commuter service serving Seattle, Bellevue, the University of Washington, the big transit destinations to our south in King County. I won't go into a lot of detail. I think Sam will cover some of this later, but over the course of the late 90s and aughts, we made a series of investment decisions to build a rail system that will serve this corridor. And that rail system is coming into place incrementally. And part of that system is serving the north end. And as the rail system expands, it will displace our traditional commuter market. We have devoted about 30% of our service to serving downtown with long haul buses. As the rail system makes its way up the corridor that's giving us the opportunity to rethink our network and reinvest that 30% of our service. And so we made a decision about a decade ago, knowing that these regional investments were coming, to move into bus rapid transit as our primary way of improving transit speed and reliability and capacity in a suburban context. And I'm going to show you how that's playing out and going to play out over the next decade or so. So next slide, please. So I'm not going to torture you with this map in detail, but this is just a snapshot of the point I just made. The green line at the bottom of this map is a rail segment that just opened 2 weeks ago in North Seattle, and it connects to a network south into downtown that I'm sure Sam will talk about. We used to serve all the way into downtown Seattle, and we pulled about a third of our commuter service back 2 weeks ago to serve the rail terminal station at Northgate that you see on that map right there. So that's the first step in our network restructure. We took the service hours that we saved and we invested them in more frequent service north of that location. In 2024, you can see a station up there called Linwood. 4 more rail stations are going to open about 2.5 years from now. And when that happens, we'll pull the rest of our commuter service back up to serve that new terminal. And so at that point, we will have very little service moving across the county line, and we'll be focusing on building out an intra-county network that will rely most heavily on bus rapid transit expansion. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll talk a little bit about what BRT is in our context. So our goals were to provide more reliable service, more capacity, and to grow ridership, with the regional transit agency delivering the rail mode and the real high capacity transit mode. We wanted to scale our investments to complement that mode, to meet demand within our county and create those connections to the regional hubs. So our design principles are really to try to achieve the highest level of performance you could with a bus-based system, operating within our arterial context. So, for example, our principles include operating at high frequency, 10-minute headways at least, so that the service is easy, so that there's no schedule required, so that people know where it is and when it runs and don't have to think about that. 10-second dwell times, so the system is moving all the time, moving quickly and rapidly from one stop to the next. Off-board fare collection and fare payment, three-door coaches that allow boarding without having to queue up at a fare box at the front of the bus. Really those train type service characteristics, but applied in a bus context. Station spacing, a half mile to a mile apart, overlaid on the local bus network. Raised platforms and branded stations to denote those opportunities. Within the right-of-way, transit signal priority and where we can get it, bus priority right-of-way. Most of the right-of-way you see for the service shown in this slide, this is our Swift Blue Line that operates on Highway 99. It enjoys curbside, what we call business access transit lanes or BAT lanes that are bus only except for right in and right out driveways accessing businesses along the corridor. So that's really the service characteristics. Since we opened the Swift Blue Line in 2009, it has become far and away our highest performing bus line in the system. So let me show you now how it's going to look as we go forward. At the next slide, this is just looking at the north end of that bigger map I showed you a minute ago. This is Snohomish County, and this is our Swift BRT vision map. You can see the blue line on there. That is up and operating today. The green line is also up and operating today. And both of these lines connect to the regional hubs and also to our urban city centers within Southwest Snohomish County. At the top of that green line, you probably can't read it on this slide, but that's Seaway Transit Center. That's where the Boeing wide body plant is. And that's one of our busiest hubs in the system. The orange line you see in the sort of middle of that grid is a project that we're breaking ground on in February of next year. And that's serving east-west from Edmonds College on the west to the city of Mill Creek on the right. In the middle, it will be serving the Linwood Transit Center, which will become the northern terminal for the rail system in 2.5 years. So we'll be building and opening this line in time for the opening of that light rail system. And when that happens, we'll have 2 of these 3 lines, the blue and the orange, connecting to the rail system. And then we'll have the northern line, which will be our next line called the Gold Line, serving the north end of the county. So really what we're trying to do here is provide an easy to use network that's integrated with the regional investments, connecting the urban and suburban centers within our county, and focusing on serving the areas within our city's comp plans where they're concentrating residential and employment growth. And then this forms the bones of our system that will be fed by our local services, by our other fixed route services, and by our paratransit and microtransit services. So that's it in a nutshell. The last slide I have just sort of shows you how we are approaching the build out of the system over time. So I'll stop here with a quick look at the timeline for completing our system. Oops, it went away. Oh, there it is. So blue line opened a little over 10 years ago, green line just before the pandemic, which was great and also a bit of a bummer. Swift orange line opening up in 2024 when the light rail system makes it up to Linwood. We'll be expanding the blue line to serve one of the other rail stations on that line, just over the county line into Shoreline, which is a town just north of Seattle. Gold line will be our next one. That's going up into the north part of the county where there's a huge amount of growth occurring, where there's affordable housing, where there's land for light industrial development. It's kind of going gangbusters. And then we're going to expand that green line. And then eventually our last line will be a silver line. And that's going to be an east-west line that connects to the east side of the county. What I'll leave you with here is that we planned these projects the way I've described, and also to leverage robust federal participation. We got a small start CIG grant for the green line, and we just secured $43 million in federal small starts and ARPA funding for the orange line, and we'll be planning that gold line as well to be a competitive candidate for a third small start grant. So this is the core of our system. There's lots of other stuff going on, but I wanted to it made sense to us as a suburban county to focus here. This is how we think we can best scale transit capacity and performance to meet demand within our county and take advantage of those broader regional investments. Thanks, James.
Thank you so much, Rick. Really appreciate it. Great to see the good work that's happening. That certainly takes time. Do we have any questions from any of our directors before we move to our next speaker? Director Sim.
Thank you, Chair Gore. Rick, thanks so much for taking the time to be here with us today. It's great to hear your progress going forward. I was wondering, looking back, or as we consider this type of model, do you see anything that would have, in hindsight, would have made your building your system easier? In other words, if you had the right governance structure in place, the right of way you mentioned, even technology, knowing what you know today, how would you be planning a system like this today? And then if you don't mind, just a second question is, I'm speculating that you may have encountered public perception about transit as well when you developed this. How did you overcome that in developing this system, getting people to believe that transit was worthwhile?
No, there's a lot there. Those are two good questions that kind of go to the heart of the cell here. Well, our system was planned in a couple of ways to ensure strong support at the policy level. One, it aligns to our MPO's regional goals. So we have a high functioning metropolitan planning organization that has pretty robust transportation and land use plans. And so the system I just described has been planned to align with those regional goals. And that's really important. We also planned the system in really close coordination with our cities because we're pretty highly dependent on cities to work with us to provide that reliable right-of-way. You know, we're not building busways. You know, we're not building bus-only structures or lanes. We're working with cities and with the state DOT to create bus right-of-way within the existing arterial network. And there's a lot of work there. You can't just assume it's going to happen. It really requires a lot of pre-work with the cities to plan those bus-only lanes or those curbside business access transit lanes, the signal priority, the signal infrastructure. So there's a lot of retail city by city work that goes on to make the system work. But the cities are also on the metropolitan planning organization, so they're already bought in to the regional growth strategy. So that creates the starting point. We did do a sales tax increase to pay for this system, and it was subject to a vote of the people. And we developed the BRT vision and presented it to the public as an upgrade to the local bus system with increased capacity, faster speeds, more reliable service, higher quality service. And the public responded to those messages. We're able to sort of deliver those characteristics at a lower price point than a full-blown rail system. On your second question, yeah, we're fortunate up here. We got a pretty collegial county. We work very closely with the local business community. You know, Boeing is a big part of our business community up here in Snohomish County, but we also have a lot of other employers. Our labor and environmental community were mostly collegial, right? And we were able to build a coalition of support by employers, municipalities, you know, other stakeholder groups to support the ballot measure that we put forward to fund the system. So again, it takes a lot of work, but for us, it began with that regional vision.
Is there any infrastructure you wish you would have had? I mean, you know, designated lanes, I mean, technology.
Well,
anything?
I mean, yeah, if I was king for a day, I mean, I spent 20 years at Sound Transit. So I was and Sound Transit is Seattle's BART. It's the regional transit authority. And, you know, I started as a rail guy. So if I had my way, I would have, you know, busways, right? So the buses could always go 50, 60 miles an hour, but that's not realistic in our suburban context. So, you know, we try to problem solve essentially mile by mile to make sure we've got the ability to maintain those 10-minute headways and that service quality.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director.
And it's probably more expensive. Well,
Go ahead, Paul. Your turn. You have a question?
I do, Rick. I'm just curious how you are addressing COVID recovery.
COVID recovery?
Correct. It's rebuilding trust in your ridership, getting people to feel safe, returning, and seeing that as a continuing viable alternative in a post-COVID world.
Yep. well, we've taken COVID extremely seriously up here in Washington State. We've had a very robust response by the public and private sector. So I feel like we've been fortunate in this corner of the country to handle it responsibly. We lost a coach operator in 2020 and relatively early in the pandemic, and that was a real wake-up call for us. So we've been real strict about COVID protocols. We've enforced the federal mask mandate pretty robustly. We've been very committed to our public safety and public health protocols. So we've upgraded the HVAC systems on all of our vehicles. We do usually twice daily disinfecting of our coaches. And we've recently implemented a vaccine requirement that we're working through right now. And we've engaged in a marketing campaign in conjunction with other regional transit providers, to market the safety steps we've taken. And, as we've seen employers begin to bring people back, and in particular, as the University of Washington came back into session in September, UW is a huge school with 60,000 people. We've seen ridership begin to come back up. And so it's you got to communicate with your customers and let them know what you're doing. And so, it's working bit by bit, but it's been a challenge, especially with the Delta surge.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for Rick before he needs to jump off the line and move to our next speaker?
Just one question, if I can, Chair. Rick, thank you for your presentation. What do you do about special populations or differentiated populations? So we have things that we're doing for young people in Sacramento. You've got those who are economically disadvantaged. You have people with disabilities. So it's always a balancing act there, I think.
Yeah, I think you got to push yourself to do better. We've recently gone through a diversity, equity, and inclusion training and program development exercise, and incorporated DEI into our mission, vision, and values. We do have locally and regionally discounted low-income fares, youth fares, senior fares. We take a real light touch on fare enforcement. We don't use fare enforcement police. We use service ambassadors, we call them, whose mission is education first. And we're updating our public outreach processes and best practices to focus on who we're missing in our traditional public engagement models. So that's a work in progress. So I don't have a perfect answer for you. I can tell you that we've recognized the need to try to do a better job reaching marginalized populations and figuring out how best to serve them.
And do you do anything special for young people on this?
We have a youth fair, and we work with the local school districts. It's a bit of a digression, but right now all transit agencies are struggling with recruitment and staffing, and the school bus providers in particular are pretty hard hit because they're kind of at the low end of the transit totem pole in terms of wage and benefits. And so we're actually providing, free transportation for some of our school districts right now, not changing our service, just not charging fares, because we're seeing students migrate into our system because the school bus, yellow bus systems are having trouble meeting demand.
So for what it's worth, so our regional transit has free rides for young people anywhere, anytime. I think last month we were up 175% coming back. So they don't have an option, so they're using it. And hopefully we can keep them on. To get into adulthood.
Yeah, that's a live conversation, and it's a real issue. And Sam may have some insights on. I know that Seattle schools are having a similar issue. So,
okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
We've got a hard stop at 10:30, and there's a couple of questions. So we're going to let you go. We really appreciate your time, and I know you need to leave. And then we've got our next presenter, so maybe he will be able to answer the questions that our directors have. So let's see. I don't know, James, if you already.
Thank you.
Sam?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll give him a proper introduction, and maybe a little intermission here, but don't grab your popcorn though. Don't go away. So just, and we really wanted to have a suburban transit operator. You just heard from Rick, come and talk, and they are not the only transit operator, right? They're sort of in the larger kind of ecosystem of the transit operators, and a couple of takeaways that I heard from Rick, and I've been thinking a lot about it in terms of this next generation's transit strategy, is while they are building out a pretty robust rail network in Seattle, and I have my own concerns about whether we can afford to do the rail network here, they've made a big bet on buses, right? And so you heard Rick say, if I was king for a day, I'd build busways and dedicated lanes. Maybe that's not feasible, but I want to make sure you all understand that what they have done is work on the concept of bus rapid transit to speed up buses through a number of different sort of infrastructure, whether it's signalization, platforms, prepaid fares, right? We are getting faster buses. Our express lanes that we are trying to build out a network for are partly a bus infrastructure network. And so when he talks about infrastructure, I would suggest to all of you, he's also talking about a civic infrastructure. You heard him mention the MPO, you heard him mention cities and counties. And this is why we wanted Sam Zimbabwe to come and be our second speaker this morning, because our state partner, Caltrans, glad to see Alex here this morning from District 3, but building out those express lanes and those toll lanes are really important as a rapid transit strategy. For all of you as cities and counties, you have a huge role to play in actually making our rapid bus network a true rapid bus network. And I remind you, we don't have 1 mile of toll lane in this region yet. And we also don't have any true BRT. We have good express bus commuter service. It gets stuck in the traffic with everybody else. So what can cities and counties do? What kind of a partner can they be? This is why we wanted Sam to come speak to you all. So delighted to have Sam Zimbabwe. Sam is the director of the Seattle Department of Transportation. And by the way, cities that actually are rethinking their public works and creating departments of transportation, please note that as well, because I think that's a really important move that I think some of our bigger jurisdictions should think about. So Sam's been at Seattle DOT at the helm, I believe, for a couple of years now. He was also with the Washington, D.C. District DOT, and he served a number of roles there, including DDOT's first Chief Project Delivery Officer. So Sam comes with a really varied background, including getting stuff done, getting stuff built, and getting it built on time. So happy to have you, and Sam, take it away.
All right, it's great to be with you all. And I can touch on a couple of those questions. Those are great questions. It's great to hear the questions for Rick too. So I have a couple slides too. I'll walk through. I'll try to be quick so we leave time for questions, but enough in depth that you get a flavor. So James, I think you all are bringing up the slides on this one too. Perfect. And I really wanted to talk about a little bit of this, what it means to build a transit region. And I've only been here in the Puget Sound region for a couple of years, so I'm standing on the shoulders of a lot of people who have come before me. And hopefully I get a lot of the history right, but I'm still learning it myself. You can go to the next slide. Just a couple of key points that I'll tell you, I'm going to tell you, and then I'll come back and hopefully talk about them as well. But progress takes a lot of time. And I've had a chance to read through the next generation strategy. It seems like it's setting you all on the right course as a region to have these progressive, like successive conversations that will be necessary. There's a lot of different strategies, and that's what the next gen strategy really shows. And then I want to just encourage you all, as you think about how to evaluate your progress towards that, to capture some key indicators. We often, in terms of transit, think about how many people are riding, and that is certainly something that's important. But I think there's some other things that might be equally as important around the travel time, the reliability of those trips, the access and availability of transit, reducing barriers to access, and then thinking about how people are getting to the places that are so important. James, you saw earlier that those top 10 destinations, sort of how are people getting to those places and how can you change that? And the ridership will come along with that as you look at some of those performance measures. So you can go to the next slide. I'll orient you also to the Puget Sound region and where Seattle sits in that region, sort of at the center. But also, similar to Sacramento, we have the full range of rural to urban within this region. We've experienced a lot of really intensive growth. Seattle sits at the center of this larger region that goes all the way down to Tacoma at the bottom, across the Puget Sound with ferry service going, serving, as Rick said, Kitsap County, and then a series of both rail and bus going north and south. When you get into the center, into Seattle, into the city of Seattle, Seattle's about, now we're about 750,000 people, close to, but we've seen some really rapid growth over the last few decades. That has rapidly shifted people's transportation patterns and also given people an opportunity to think about moving around differently. This shows our existing and planned rapid transit network, and we call it our transit plus multimodal network, because it's not just the transit that's going in these corridors, it's also pedestrian connections, bicycle connections to and from transit that helps people make those last mile connections, and then also that regional rail spine that sort of runs through the middle. So it doesn't matter quite as much. You can sort of blur your eyes at this, really think about the coverage that this is providing to cities. So you can move on to the next slide as well. So I said we've experienced a lot of rapid growth. We've also seen really rapid change in how people are accessing central Seattle. So central Seattle is downtown and some of the downtown adjacent neighborhoods that have a lot of employment. Before pre-pandemic, it was over 200,000 people had jobs in this area that we call Central Seattle, and about 100,000 people lived, close to 100,000 people lived in this Central Seattle area. So very jobs focused, this is the traditional downtown, sort of the core of the region. And we saw over a decade, a little bit less than a decade, a really rapid shift in how people were accessing downtown. That's because of the light rail investments, because of some of these other transit investments. But you can also see a shift in how people walking to work, biking to work. And even pre-pandemic, we were seeing an increase in people teleworking, in people working from home. And we expect that will continue, but some of the same level of demand will happen on the transit side as well. So we went from about 34.5% single occupancy vehicle during sort of the peak congested commute hours, down to about a quarter of people accessing this central area in a car by themselves, a growth in transit, growth, as I said, in walking and biking as well. So, this is one thing that we really look at, and we try to track through survey data with people who work downtown to try to get at how they're getting there. You can go to the next slide. I talked about, this is again that map of our frequent of our corridors that we're making these investments in, and a map of what we call the very frequent transit network. So this is an area that you can expect a bus every 10 minutes throughout the course of the day, all day, sort of 10-minute frequency service that we work in partnership with King County Metro, who is the countywide transit provider, to plan these corridors. This is also tied to some of the land use code in Seattle around things like parking provision, other aspects of the development and build out of our city. You can see the rapid growth that we've been able to achieve in the number of people who live within close walking distance of this 10-minute frequency network. So 2015 was a critical year for Seattle. It was right after we had in 2014 there, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, there was a countywide vote for some additional funding for the bus system that failed. There was a fiscal cliff. We thought we were gonna have to cut a whole lot of bus service. The city stepped in, city voters passed a voter initiative to fund a whole bunch of transit service. The county situation improved. We actually ended up adding transit service over the course of this period, but we really focused on this in adding transit service to serve this 10-minute frequency network. And we went from a quarter of households in the city of Seattle with access to that 10-minute frequency network. Within 5 years, we were up to 70% of households in Seattle with a 10-minute walk to a 10-minute frequency transit service. So that kind of access and reliability really drives a lot of what we've seen in terms of people thinking differently about their transportation options. You can go to the next slide as well. And so we've seen, again, we don't focus on ridership, but we do track it. We've seen this growth in ridership over the course of the last decade. And this is, again, coming right up into the pre-pandemic period, but we were seeing growth in both the rail and metro bus, but we'd started to see some stagnation too. And so we're a little bit concerned coming out of the pandemic that we continue to make some of these investments that continue to make transit frequent and reliable. And we don't really know what the future of sort of the office work, somewhat traditional transit ridership will be. And so we'll need to stay nimble and adapt as well. But we were getting up to, close to like 80 rides per capita per year for everybody in the region here. You can keep going. So I talked about that Seattle Transit measure. I'll come back again and talk about sort of the iterations of success and failure at the ballot box. But the goals that have driven us as we've looked to provide to fund transit service, and we buy that service from King County, from Metro, is to implement that frequent transit network, to improve access for historically disadvantaged populations. And that's really trying to understand what needs there are out there. Some of that's fare programs, some of that's education on how the system works and helping people, more recent immigrants to the country, understand how to access transit, seniors. And through that process, we also understand what we might need to do. In addition, I talked a little bit aligning those transportation and land use goals. The places where we're focusing development, changing some of the development rules are also the places where we've invested in transit frequency and reliability, and then adding service to address where we've got crowding, and then looking at those places that aren't the traditional downtown focused commute. Things in here in this region, it's east-west connections. Rick talked about we're built out on a north-south spine. We don't have a great set of east-west connections, and then investing in some 24-hour service for folks that don't have traditional commute times. Okay, you can go to the next slide, and I'll try to wrap up quick and get into the discussion. I just want to, I said at the beginning, this takes time. Progress takes a lot of time. We are still building out a network that was not too different than what was conceived about 50 years ago in the series of initiatives that were brought to the voters that were called Forward Thrust, most of which on the transportation side were not successful. So we're still actually catching up from where we could have been 50 years ago. In 1995, there was the first attempt at funding the regional rail spine. It's called Sound Move. It failed. The next year it passed. There was a series of successive votes at the county level that were approved that helped build out the bus system that we have today. In 2007, another Sound Transit 2, an expansion of the regional network that Rick talked about, how Snohomish County is now building towards that. It failed. The next year it was successful. I talked about in 2014, there was a countywide ballot measure that failed. The city stepped in. We've now successively passed those, passed an ST3, another regional expansion at the regional level, and then also renewed that Proposition 1. So we've it feels like we're turning the tide on some of these things, but we also recognize we're only as successful as we can continue to make the case with our voters. We're dependent on voter support. And so it's really important to think about those performance measures and how we continue to deliver on those things for what people need and make transit useful. All right, you can go to the next. And I think this is almost my last one. Just that transit can't do it by itself. 50% of King County Metro fare revenues come from businesses and institutions for a variety of reasons here. Many businesses buy transit passes for their workers, large employers in particular. That really backstops a lot of Metro fare revenue, but also makes it sort of puts money back in people in workers' pockets, helps people have other income to do other things. We've got a regional coordinated ORCA system. The city's actually not part of it. It's all the transit agencies working together. This is One Regional Card for All is the acronym, but we love our orcas up here in the Puget Sound. So it's an integrated fare payment system for everybody, working on a next gen orca that will include a mobile app, other ways to integrate fare payments, and continue some of these equity-based programs in a really seamless way. And then James was just talking about it, Rick talked about it, but local government plays a critical role in supporting the infrastructure, supporting the operations. And we've got a very close working relationship with Metro and Sound Transit and community transit on everything from curbside layover to signal timing to things like that. And I think that's it. Oh, the last one. Transit can't do it alone in the regard of this partnership as well. So land use takes a lot of time. We do a lot with micromobility, trying things out, whether that's scooter and bike share to micro transit. And then we always recognize here that all transit trips are walking trips. We do a lot to invest in making sure people have safe, accessible pathways to and from transit. And I included something we just put out. Rick talked about the 3 light rail stations that just opened a couple of weeks ago here. There were a whole lot of things that weren't the rail that we did as a city to support that. And if we had just said, okay, Sound Transit's building a rail, opening 3 stations, find your way there, we wouldn't have it be part of a successful transportation system. So with that, I think that's it. And I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Sam. Really appreciate that. And do we have questions from any of our directors? All right, go ahead, Director Sin.
Thanks, Chair Gore. I feel like that student today. Again, also, Sam, thank you for your time. It's very informative. The question I was going to ask earlier, and hoping you can answer it too, is you alluded to the uncertainties of the pandemic in terms of ridership. And so, with telework, we're all trying to figure out what the future will hold in that environment. I saw on your slide many of the businesses supporting you with that backstop, 50%. Do you have any indication or prediction whether those companies may stop because telework might be their preferred choice? Can you speak to that?
I think what will likely change first is that people won't be commuting quite as often, and that a lot of the 5-day-a-week commutes will shift here to something more like 2 to 3 day commutes, at least at first. That seems to be the direction that a lot of the big employers are going. That's where the city's going as well. We've sort of said, we're going to expect you to be in the office about 2 days a week, but we haven't even quite gotten to that point yet. So you can imagine that's a real cut in ridership potential and potential revenue. So I don't know exactly where it will go. I expect that employers will continue to support transit passes for their employers, partly because we make it pretty easy with that ORCA program. Also, there are some rules here for large employers around their responsibilities around reducing commute trip impacts, and that's at the state level. And that one way that often plays out is with employer-supported transit passes.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Joyner, and then Director Saylor.
Thank you, Chair. Sam, I'm going to put you on the spot for the moment. Sorry about that. You said that you've read our next gen plan. I have a concern that you've said that it's headed in the right direction. My concern is that it doesn't go far enough. So you've taken a look at it. Does it go far enough? If not, how can we press even further into this next gen concept?
I'd say I don't know enough about Sacramento to know whether it goes far enough or if it's the right distance at the right time. I think that a plan is only as good as how you go about implementing it, and I think what I see from it is the right sorts of things that any region should be doing, and then it'll be time to make, then it'll be working with the transit agencies, with the cities, with the counties, all of you all to and your staffs to move things forward. And I think, one thing that part of where I talk about building a transit region is that you can't go too far too quickly in some ways. You've got to meet some people where they are and then figure out how you continually make some good investments in a virtuous cycle. You've got to demonstrate the ability, that things work, and then how you scale those to a larger scale. As Rick talked about a little bit too, they started with a bus line. The first Swift line was 10 years ago. Now they've got a lot of them in development because they showed it could work.
All right, thank you. So you also gave us a quote that I wrote down, and I think it's very enlightening for me. I hadn't thought of it that way, that all transit trips are walking trips. And so that really fine tunes that first mile, last mile thought for me, at least. So I want to thank you for that. That's it, Chair.
Thank you. Director Saylor?
Thank you, Chair Gore, and thanks to Sam for being with us today. And my questions are about I've got a couple of things. Every time we look at another region or another metropolitan area, we strive for, well, they got some good things going. We strive for that. And of course, you've solved your problems with your solutions, and you've taken years and years to get to the point you're at. So we can't just sort of whole scale apply what you have on the ground to what might fit here. So we look for ways of learning bits and pieces from your journey. One of the things that I'm struck by is the multiple approaches to your community's growing consensus and acceptance of transit. So your tax measures, or your property, your measures, your failures and your successes, we learn from both of them. How much of that was just a single jurisdiction, the city of Seattle, and how much of it involved your partners in the region? And were any of those measures votes of the people beyond the city? And the thing is, a lot of our trips, we can claim that we are just rural, but many of our people, and the problem is our people don't stay in their rural setting. They all travel to other places. And so we're always at the struggle of who pays for what. And so I'm interested in how much of a regional consensus and what caused the growing acceptance in the communities that you serve, willingness to pay for it.
That's a great question. So a lot of those votes were larger than the city. All of the Sound Transit votes are larger than just the city, and even larger than just King County. So it's really the most of the population here is in 3 counties: King in the center with Seattle, Snohomish, and Pierce to the south with Tacoma in it. And just for context, Seattle is about 1/3 of the population of King County. So King County is 2.5 million or so. In all of those, I think that people in the city have long seen that they benefit from transit and have been willing to tax themselves. Outside of the city, there's been a little bit less viewpoint of that. But I think as we've built out some of this regional system, and as congestion is still something that people deal with, and on our interstates, we have, we're very constrained in terms of our car capacity. People see the congestion and the lack of reliability that they have in those trips, and so understand that transit is more than just about whether they themselves ride transit, but as part of a regional solution that helps with everybody's trips. I will say that the support is still by far the strongest within the city. It's the densest part of the region. It's the place that's most transit. More people use transit than in other parts of the region, and so sometimes those regional votes are still carried in large part by the overwhelming support in the city as well.
Thank you. Director Desmond.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Sam. This is a great presentation. I appreciate your information and the information from Rick. I'm a big fan of BRT. I think that probably has some of the most potential of any transit element to really, change some patterns. I guess my question to you, you mentioned, and I also really appreciate you saying, hey, you develop one route, maybe one line, and show that it can work, and you expand from there. I guess if you were to, be advising a group like SACOG, a regional group like this, what would you advise would be the elements we should look at when we're trying to determine where we might want to start with something like this?
I think one thing that was so again, I'm 3 years into this region, have not lived through all the transit battles and some of those successes and failures that I talked about. One of the things, our light rail system started out with a leg from downtown to the airport. And I think that was really important for people here, was to be able to connect from downtown to the airport, and capture some of those commute trips. But it was really just going one direction from downtown. And it was built at a time when it was really hard to spend a lot of money on, there was financial crisis of the late 2000s. There was a lot of skepticism that a regional rail system could work. And so there were some decisions made in the building of that didn't integrate it into the communities it was serving quite as well. In the late 2000s, or even a little bit later than that, there was a connection that was up to the University of Washington, which, as Rick said, huge institution, both from an employment and a demand perspective in terms of students. And I think that really changed people's perceptions of what transit could do, because all of a sudden you were going from downtown to the university, which used to be a pretty slow, probably 20-30 minute bus trip. It was now 5 to 7 minutes on a train. Then this next extension has even connected that university and more to the community, so that it's really hard for one transit line to change regional commute patterns. And so really that first demonstrated that it was possible to do it. The second piece, connecting to a major institution, really started to change people's view of what transit could do. And now we're starting to see, as it becomes larger and more useful, it's really starting to shape how people think of themselves and even some of their location decisions. In a couple of years, light rail will go across Lake Washington and into Bellevue, which is really the suburban downtown of the region, and connect some of those locations as well. And that will again reshift how people are thinking about transit in this region.
All right. Thank you. That's helpful. I mean, I think there are many factors to guide where we might start with something here. But that's right. I really, as this regional transportation group, oftentimes the different entities are kind of competing with each other. I would love to see SACOG really help inform James. These are kind of the lowest hanging fruit where we could really explore some BRT options, some that may be within one jurisdiction, some that traverse various jurisdictions, some that go from freeway to surface streets. But just really look forward to having that discussion, a much larger discussion about that. So thanks very much, Sam.
Thank you, Director Desmond. And then Director Saylor, we'll take your last question, or this question. It's now, we're hitting upon 11 o'clock and you do have some business we have to take. So we'll take your question and then I think move forward. So with that, Director Saylor.
Thanks a lot, Chair Gore. My question has to do with the integration of managed lane projects and something like bus rapid transit or other elements of the transit system. Your comment that every transit trip is also a walking trip. There's also interaction between how we use our vehicle infrastructure, our highway infrastructure to incentivize transit and to have folks consider the true cost. What kind of accompaniment on the highway systems came along with your transit expansions?
So there hasn't, this region has a pretty robust HOV network. No, not much toll lane, sort of managed lane network. The HOV, but definitely buses use the HOV system and get to and from central Seattle by the HOV system. There's also some places where buses do have dedicated right-of-way within the highway system, or especially as they come into downtown Seattle, that bypasses some of the places where there's sort of intractable congestion. And there's a few places where there's some managed, some toll facilities, but in this region, it's mostly part of a financing strategy for the infrastructure and not part of a transportation policy strategy in terms of pricing for behavior change. So I think that hopefully that answers your question. A lot of what we're doing in the city is repurposing some of the city right-of-way to serve buses. So that's in places where we're removing general purpose capacity for cars and allocating that to transit, while also making sure that, you know, we've got a very robust and important freight industry or industrial base here, accessing the Port of Seattle and things like that. So we consistently have some challenges around also making sure that trucks aren't getting stuck in congestion. And so looking at ways to address that issue as well.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Sam, for your time this morning, for sharing with us, for your insights and some really good questions. This is hard work. It means collaboration. It is not easy, but it's great to see the work that your community has done. And I know we've got a large lift. So with that, we'll wrap up the workshop. We need to move to item 9, which is actually our action item, which is to adopt the next generation transit strategy. And Chris, you did your presentation, but I want to make sure we didn't forget anything that you wanted to share, because you did the presentation, but we might have some questions about the strategy itself. So I'm just gonna, I don't know where you are, but Chris, check in with me. Anything else you need to share before we have questions from our directors or take public comment?
Thank you, Chair Gore. I have nothing else to share, but I'm definitely available for questions or anything. I think we may have at least a written comment that came in that Lynette may want to read through as well. So,
great, thank you. If there are questions, let's do this. Let's take the public comment that you have, Lynette, and any other public comment, and then we can bring it back to directors for any other questions or comments on the strategy.
Thanks, Chair Gore. I do have a written comment that I'll read into the record. And then we do have two people on the line who would like to make a verbal comment. So I'll go ahead and read the comment now. It's from Glenda Marsh from the SMART, S-M-A-R-T Steering Committee. She says, Sacramento Metro Advocates for Rail and Transit participated on the Policy Advisory Committee for the Next Generation Transit Study and support adoption of the recommendations, strategies, and actions. The study provides actions that will guide transit system improvements, resulting in efficient investments that will make transit a competitive, useful, and much appreciated travel mode in our region. The use of data, advanced intelligence systems, and cooperative planning amongst the region's transit operators will provide affordable, seamless connections across the region. This will allow our transit and road networks to serve existing and growing numbers of new residents and businesses with ease of mobility. We can't hold back on implementing the actions recommended. I remember when first computers, then cell phones and BlackBerries were new technologies at the workplace, reserved only for a few who needed their use. But by the time smartphones arrived, there was no holding back the obvious that everyone in the workplace and all businesses needed the benefits these technologies provided for efficiency, productivity, and competitiveness. The same is true for our transit systems and the actions recommended in this report. It's obvious these actions are not optional and will benefit all businesses, employees, and residents of our region, and the sooner the better. No one should take a backseat for these benefits. SACOG is uniquely positioned to assist. So let's move forward with these resources we are so fortunate to have here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynette, for that public comment. And then let's take the other public comments that we have, the calls. I think you said that.
Sure. Our first public comment is from Mike Lucan. If you're there, Mike, you can go ahead with your comment. You have 3 minutes, no more than 3 minutes.
Good morning, Chair Gore and members of the SACOG board. This is Mike Lucan, Executive Director of Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. I just can't emphasize enough this morning how the presentation on the next generation transit study and its adoption is of vital importance to our region as we try to meet our 19% greenhouse gas emission reduction threshold, both in the MTP and Placer County's RTP. We would assert that this is just step one in a process to revamp transit in our region, and we have a long way to go beyond the next generation transit study. The next generation study is in simplistic terms, a sort of Encyclopedia Britannica of transit. It is kind of an inch deep on 20 or so very important priorities. Its only fault is it tries to be kind of all things to all people, and we have to make sure that that is not a recipe for inaction. Our recommendation is to immediately focus on efforts on a small set of 5 to 7 items from our study to focus on in the next 24 to 36 months. Most importantly, we need to focus greatly on the near term on how our transit systems can scale their systems to meet demand and recovery. Like our speaker said today, we need to engage in the region in a region-wide marketing of the safety measures undertaken for the pandemic from our transit operators, so that those operators can conserve precious resources as they recover from the impacts of the pandemic. When you visit Seattle or the Bay Area or LA, you are literally bombarded by messages on riding transit, which we have never ever done in the Sacramento region in any large scale, even by Sacramento Regional Transit. We have to do this at the same time as we move forward into the next key steps like BRT and managed lanes. SACOG, PCTPA, EDCTC, and others like Valley Vision and the Sacramento Metro Chamber are also working on hopefully developing an employer survey to determine when employment will return to our region. This is of vital importance to this discussion and developing transit strategies, and especially as the state is very decentralized in terms of determining when they're going to return back to work. I wanted to also say that the transit operators in Placer County are struggling mightily to recover from the impacts of the pandemic. Commuter service is only at about 20% of capacity, and local ridership is still very, very low. Our 3 transit operators are, however, doing many things, including a large expansion of microtransit in Lake Tahoe, implementing microtransit in Auburn, moving forward into electrifying their fleets, and we'll be issuing a large-scale RFP for microtransit in South Placer in the next few weeks. We're also implementing our first express bus from Lincoln to the South Placer hospital complexes and then on to the Watt Avenue light rail station. And lastly, we've changed our intercity medical service to a volunteer driver system used successfully by many counties in California and works much better to serve rural areas. Our South County operators are also considering comprehensive operational analyses for their systems by a variety of different methods to rethink transit systems and wrap that into their next short-range transit plans. In terms of the recommendations of the Transportation Committee on a Governance and Consolidation Study, if this is undertaken, we recommend a full independent analysis of the financials of all transit agencies included in this study, and more importantly, to really dig into their cost per hour of service and use common measures of financial stability of each transit system and not the unique financial systems methods and performance measures currently employed by each transit agency. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And we'll take our next public comment, please.
Thank you. Our next public comment and last public comment is from Autumn Bernstein. If you're there, Autumn, you can go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is Autumn Bernstein, and I'm the Executive Director of the Yolo County Transportation District. And I'm joined today by my little helper. In support of the staff's recommendation. And I believe that the next generation transit strategy is very much very consistent with the actions that the Yolo County Transportation District is taking to revamp our transit service and really move our communities forward. So we are currently focused on increasing the speed and frequency on our core routes, like the Route 42 in Yolo County, and then replacing some of our lower performing routes with microtransit, like in the city of Woodland, the city of Winters. And so we're really excited about thinking about how do we incorporate these new modes and recognize that just moving buses is not sufficient. We need to move people. The regional coordination that this plan envisions is really essential. UC Davis just reopened to in-person learning last month, and we're now seeing an influx of people across the Causeway every day. Without partnerships like the Causeway Connection, where we work together with our partners at Sacramento Regional Transit, we can't serve people who are coming from Roseville or Rancho Cordova or Elk Grove to their jobs in Davis. So having a framework for more robust collaboration to move towards a truly regional transit network to get people across the Causeway and to job destinations in Yolo County is essential for us. And then lastly, I want to emphasize, I thought the speakers did a great job of highlighting the need for our streets and highways to really reorient to prioritize transit. We're working closely with our partners at Caltrans on the managed lanes on Interstate 80 across the Causeway, which will create a lane that will prioritize transit so that we can quickly move buses back and forth across the Causeway to get people where they need to go more quickly. And we think that'll have a huge impact on our ridership and our ability to serve our communities. But just as important, our local streets and roads also need to prioritize transit in terms of making space for transit vehicles to bypass congestion, making sure that our traffic signals recognize buses and can give them the green light so they can move ahead. So I think this is a great set of strategies, and I'm really excited to partner with SACOG and with all of you to move it forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Autumn. Appreciate your comments and your update. We'll close public comment and then let's move to Director Bradford. Either has a comment or a question, and then Director Sin.
Great, thank you, Chair Gore. Just a comment. At the Transportation Committee, there was a robust discussion about whether the next gen transit strategy was innovative enough with respect to next gen technologies. And I'm certainly someone who's a big fan of the latest and greatest new technology. And I don't disagree with the perspective that was raised there at all. I'd love to see us implement cool new stuff, especially when it benefits mobility in our region. But today during Chris's presentation, I had a little bit of an aha moment that I just wanted to share with the rest of the board. This next generation transit strategy isn't necessarily about what we want to implement, but it's more about laying the foundation to support those future innovations by creating a more connected and seamless transit network across the region, as well as a transit network that is more competitive with driving a personal vehicle. These elements are key to creating a foundation for innovation, no matter what current and future modes of transit are laid on top of them. So just something that kind of really hit me today that I wanted to share. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Bradford. Director Sin.
Thank you, Chair Gore. Yeah, I appreciate Director Bradford's highlighting the conversation of our Transportation Committee. I was going to mention some of that too. The conversation that we had was very robust, from whether or not it was innovative enough to whether transit as a mode, whether it can be successful in our region from a marketing perspective. Who's going to ride it. And I really appreciated Executive Director Corliss's comments today, because it's something I've been contemplating too as this issue is coming before us. And that is, he was identifying the populations that were in the Seattle area, and comparing them to what they were here. And I came to the same conclusion, having lived in the East Bay area and in Southern California. The patterns are right before us. We've seen growth happen in Southern California. We've seen growth happen in the Bay Area, East Bay Area, and the lack of transit down in Southern California, and the time or the delay in implementing Bay Area Rapid Transit down to the Silicon Valley, those challenges that those areas and communities face, we in the Sacramento region are destined to face if we don't plan. And you heard from Sam earlier today about the timing it takes, and everybody here on this board knows how long it takes to get anything done in our respective communities. So imagine what it would take, the time it would take, the planning it would take for something like this to be accomplished in the region. Having said that, the value and the need for it is there. You know, we will continue to grow. So while telework may change things and we don't know exactly how it will affect things, we do know that our population will change. We know by 2040, over 600,000 people will come to this 6-county region. So whether you're teleworking or not, telework only offers, in my opinion, a temporary reprieve to the need. Because as population continues to grow, we will eventually max out the roads and freeways that we have today. So I wholeheartedly support this next generation transit strategy adoption, recognizing, we don't know all the technologies available to us yet. We don't know the result of teleworking yet, but the need to plan for this and to take this on is absolutely needed. And I'm happy to make a motion to move it forward as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Sim. Director Drainer.
If that was a motion, second by Baines.
I'm going to let Director Drainer go ahead. Director Drainer.
Thank you, Bonnie. I fully see the need to plan and move forward with the next generation plan. I've already expressed my concerns that it doesn't go far enough. There is an area of concern that I have, and I recognize that each of us in our own communities have the right and the ability to do whatever we think is best for our citizens. But what I've heard repeatedly from both of the speakers today and from others along this journey has been that we need to make transit more competitive with the private automobile. But what I'm also hearing is that the desire is to do that by handicapping the private automobile, by removing right-of-ways for cars and giving it to bus rapid transit, that type of thing. So are we in reality making it as competitive or more competitive, or are we drawing down the efficiency of the personal automobile and somewhat using a carrot and stick to drive people towards transit because their private automobile is no longer as useful as it once was.
Director Joyner, do you mind if I just, because I know
you're
concerned. I've heard you say this, and I know that it's come up before. I would say if you are for cost effectiveness, if you care about efficiency, then this is the strategy you have to take. If you're moving more people, that's more cost effective, then you will actually give the priority to the vehicles, whether it's a bus or a micro transit vehicle, right, or a van pool. I want us to think about the efficiency of moving people, right, and how you give premiums to those vehicles. And I know I may not change your mind on this, but it is really important to understand, because if we don't do that, if we don't have rapid bus, if we don't speed them up and have queue jumps and signal timings, then we won't have a transit system that actually I think is effective and cost effective and really works. So it is a critical issue you raise, but I want to make sure that right now, right, we had this I-80 study, we have all these empty seats on I-80, we've got to fill those empty seats, right? And to do that, we've got to give customers premium service and speed. So that's just a way that I think about this, which is why it's so important
I hear you. When you say all these empty seats, you're referring to the empty seats in private automobiles, yes?
All of them, actually.
Yeah. So this is just a freedom issue that I wrestle with, and having systems try to alter the choices that our citizens make. So I fully understand where you're coming from, James. I really do. But I wrestle with this element of how the systems would be put in place.
Thank you, Director.
Thank
you. Director Zaragoza.
Thank you, Chair. Great comments, I think, from everybody, and I really appreciated the two presentations. I thought just from the beginning when we had the 60-minute and the 16-minute intervals between, say, bus and private vehicles today, and the need to bring those into a better alignment so that they do become more. That the bus becomes a more viable option for people. But just a few things. I mean, I know, like I use El Dorado. I use our bus that goes from Placerville down to Sacramento, not regularly, but often enough to see where we're at. And we've gone. I mean, because of pandemic, we've gone. I think we had 9 routes a day to 4. And within those 4, it's probably, I think, as Placer County said, about 20% of what we normally have. I mean, I think 4 or 5 people on the bus down and back is pretty normal right now. And I don't know when that's going to get, that will eventually change and go back. But it's not anytime soon, I don't think. And when I look at downtown Sacramento, it's such a unique city in the sense that city, county, and state workers make up such a totality of the daytime folks that are down there, that until that gets back on track, we're going to continue to see what telecommuting looks like. I think we're going to have to plan for that long term, or we have to diversify the economy in Sacramento a lot more than what it currently is. If we want to, I think, see some of these things realized as well. And I think Autumn put it best. I loved her comment when she said, we need to move people, not buses. And so it's a matter of making it so that people want to get on those buses and be able to move around. Otherwise, we're building a capacity that, we're trying to build something that people aren't going to actually ride. And that doesn't work either. And when we're looking at technology, for those of you that may drive a Tesla already, autonomous vehicles, say in the next 10 to 20 years, are going to completely change the way we look at how we drive and the way patterns of cars move. I think it's going to be, that's going to be the exceptions, probably going to be folks that drive themselves versus just driving in their autonomous vehicles. And so that's going to change capacity and how we move people around as well. And so we shouldn't, I think any way we look into the future should also look at that autonomous vehicle portion of it as well. And this goes back even to when, James and I had talked about parking spaces and what that's going to look like in the future and the need to probably reduce those because we aren't going to have the same type of travel as we go forward. So just things that I wanted to bring up for the board to chew on, but also knowing that I hate to put all eggs in one basket, knowing that technology is drastically changing, and we need to really know if people are going to write it. And so it has to be built to that capacity level. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Zaragoza. Any other comments before we move forward? I really appreciate the discussion and the challenges. And there is opportunity to change strategies if need be, right? So none of this is necessarily stuck in stone because we have to try to be nimble and flexible as technologies change, as things change. I don't see any other comments. So I did hear that Director
Chair Gore, I had my hand up.
Oh, you did. I can't see you. So whoever that is.
David Sander.
Sander.
I'm sorry, I don't have video today. I think your comment is somewhat duplicative of what I was going to say. We definitely need to provide the space for innovation in our transit agencies, whether that be through consolidation or radical change in the mode of which they operate. So, nationwide, we see an awful lot of transit carriers who are really wanting to get the buses back on the routes. Not really because that's the most efficient or effective way to do things, but because that's what they've always done. And it's that sort of momentum in this space that I think we need to be very vigilant and try to avoid. And we as regional leaders ought to try to find as much political cover as possible for our agencies to do the right thing. And that probably means taking on some sacred cows in finding opportunities for innovation, things that seem very traditional, but they are wildly inefficient by modern measures. I know, talking about an agency that no longer exists, when I was on the paratransit board, we were spending something like $75 to $95 for each one-way trip for everyone who was riding paratransit in Sacramento. And at the time, you could probably Uber from one far end to the other far end of the community for under 20. And 80% of those, 80% plus of those paratransit riders could have used Uber. But rather than that, we subjected them to, a plus or minus 2 hours pickup and destination service that they could reserve only a couple days in advance and could only use once a day at enormous cost to taxpayers in the region and lousy service for the recipient. We've made some progress on that paratransit front since, but I mean, that sort of challenge still remains out there in this industry. And unless we create the space that allows our agencies to do the right thing and actually innovate, this is always going to be 2% of our trips and a highly inefficient use of tax dollars. So that's I think we've started on the right step here, trying to create some sense of innovation. I just think we need to really keep the pedal to the metal and make sure that it actually happens and doesn't just get ground down by the forces of momentum of ideas passed.
Thank you, Director Sander. And along with that, making sure we are talking to our communities about what they need and how this is working, right? And we've got that community outreach portion as well. Director Joyner?
Yeah, let me just say that I wholeheartedly agree and support what Dr. Sanders has just laid out. I understand that this is the groundwork for moving forward. I probably am not going to get in the way of it, but I think we can do a lot better. And I think that David Sanders' framework of how we should move forward is, for me, the correct path forward.
Thank you, Director Joyner. Director Burris?
I just want to echo a lot of the sentiments that Director Joyner has been voicing, because I want to make sure that the direction that we're heading isn't one that, punishes people for needing that personal efficiency. And, the overall group efficiency can't come at the price of saying that, for example, a parent with their children can't make it to where they need to go because they have specific needs that require a personal vehicle. Those personal freedoms need to be taken into account, and they, can't be sacrificed for the sake of making sure the numbers look good on paper.
Thank you. All right, any other further comments or questions? Thank you, everyone. Really do appreciate your input, your feedback, and really appreciate the conversation that happened with the Transportation Commission so that we as a board could talk about this together. And I think there's agreement there. It's challenging. We want innovation. And this is all a balance, but I know that we actually, as electeds who serve on these other boards as well, can, it's our job to keep our eye on the needs of our community, making sure that we push innovation and balancing the needs. So lots more work to come. So I think Director Soon was willing to make a motion, if that's correct. And then I heard Director Baines willing to make a second.
That's correct.
Take those and ask for a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Baines?
Aye.
Howdeshelt for Bernasconi?
Aye.
Bradford?
Aye.
Branscombe?
Aye.
Houlihan?
Aye.
Burris?
Aye.
Clark-Kretz? Aye. Desmond?
Aye.
Frericks? Absent Frost? Absent Gallardo? Absent Gog?
Yes.
Gore?
Yes.
Guerrero?
Aye.
Harris?
Yes.
Joyner?
Yes.
Kennedy,
Aye.
Kozlowski,
Yes.
Lozano,
Aye.
Middleton, absent New,
Aye.
Sander,
Aye.
Saragosa,
Aye.
Sailor,
Aye.
Chenier,
Aye.
Spokely.
Yes.
Director Stallard was losing reception, but asked me to record an I vote for him. Soon,
Aye.
Thomas,
Aye.
West, absent, and Vice Chair Jennings.
Yes.
Thank you. And Chair Gore, I already noted your vote. Motion carries.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. We're going to move on to something that's actually nice and a little bit bittersweet. And that is item 10, which is we are going to approve a resolution honoring Bruce Griesenbeck upon his retirement. So I'll let James take this away. I know Bruce is joining us. Bruce has done an amazing job for SACOG over all these years, and I was really saddened to hear that he was going to retire. But we all get to that opportunity to retire. And so with that, I'm going to pass this on to James.
Thank you so much, Chair Gore. Bittersweet indeed. I'm actually going to ask Casey Lazan, our Deputy Director, to kick this off. And a number of us would like to say a few things. Casey?
Yes, thank you, James. Good morning, Chair and members of the board. It's a great honor for me to be able to kick off this item. Bruce is our data and analysis manager at SACOG. We do have a resolution for you to adopt today that really is commending him for his many years of outstanding, excellent service to SACOG and to the region, and honestly to the transportation planning profession in the nation. Bruce is committed to data-informed decision-making, and that is sharing, developing the information with stakeholders to ensure that they understand, that they agree, that they help shape that information that then goes forward to policymakers for the tough decisions that you all have to make. He is committed to that. He designs and leads his team to do that. He has done that over the years in every metropolitan transportation plan that has come before the SACOG board, in service of local agencies who have had to make complex planning and transportation decisions. He has led this agency in the development and advancement of transportation analysis, such that SACOG has been a leading agency and region around the country in metropolitan transportation planning. And Bruce has sat on countless peer review boards around the country for modeling and analysis development to help them to be able to increase and improve their own work in this. And so it is indeed bittersweet to be commending him today and to recommending this to you, because he has really, I think, advanced so much of the work that we do, and has been just a wonderful public servant and friend and colleague and mentor to so many of us at SACOG and in the region and in the industry. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to James.
Thanks, Casey. And I'm actually going to ask Kirk Trost to say a few things.
Thanks, James. So I've been around and been in the trenches with Bruce many, many years. And so I just wanted to say, as you all know, the great challenge of SACOG is to create a long-term vision and plan for the growth and future of the region that is an archetype for quality of life of our residents, public health and mobility of those residents, racial and economic prosperity and equality, environmental sustainability. But for 2 decades, that work has always started with the best research, the best data, and the best analysis. And Bruce has really been at the centerpiece of all of that work for 2 decades. He has distinguished himself not just because he is the highest professional in his field, but because of the dedication, the passion, the compassion, indeed the love that Bruce has shown for the region, for his work, for SACOG as an institution, and perhaps most importantly for his colleagues and friends that he's worked with. He will be missed, but he has left really an indelible imprint on this region that will not be forgotten. And personally, I'm really proud and thankful to call him my comrade in the trenches, my thought partner over the years, and indeed a friend. So thanks, Bruce. Appreciate you.
Thank you very much, Kirk. Are there any comments from any of our directors? Director Soon.
Chair Gore, sorry, do you mind if I just I want to say a couple of very quick things, I promise, but it's I know that you know, we talk a lot in this board and in this region, and Mike Lucan just mentioned the 19% greenhouse gas target. One of the many incredible special qualities that Bruce has is deep into the world of data and numbers. He can pop back out in a second and have a policy-based conversation with you. He understands, really, he has a 360 view on so much of the work we do, rooted in data, as Kirk just said, a national leader in this. But I also, and these are the things that you all don't get to see as the board members. He understands all of you. He understands the nature of this region and this board and the challenges that all of you have as local governments. And he can stand toe to toe and really have a healthy debate on policy, on numbers, on metrics with the best state agency out there. And that's how he serves you. And that's how he serves all of us, with understanding the goals of what people are trying to do and environmental goals and equity goals, but really also having your back and using data in order to do that. That is a remarkable and unique quality. And just the other thing I would say about Bruce, and I don't know how many of you, I'm sure you've all had this and people you work with and that are around you, Bruce is willing to speak his mind. And Bruce, I've always appreciated that about you from day one. He is willing to speak up. He is willing to challenge. He's willing to question. And at the end of the day, he's a team player. And that is an incredible quality among many others. So thank you, Bruce. And back to the board.
Thank you very much, James. Well said, definitely well said. All right, and so now I see a few hands. So Director Soon.
Thank you, Chair Gore. I'll be brief. I just want to say, Bruce, it's been such a pleasure knowing you and working with you. You're such a great resource for this board. You and I have had some of those data and policy conversations that James alluded to, and your knowledge and depth of knowledge on these issues. I'm just so grateful for. I learned a lot from you. And I want to wish you the very best. I too was bittersweet when I saw your name come up on the agenda. So we're sorry to see you go, but very happy for you. So best wishes, and please don't be strangers. Stay in touch. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Soon. I do want to allow Bruce to make a few comments, but how about if we see if there's any public comment, because I need to do that on this item, and I don't know if there is some public comment. And then I can take a resolution, then we can take a motion and then have Bruce make any comments. So Lynette, do we have any public comment?
No public comment.
All right, terrific. With that, do I have a motion, please? Director
moved.
Saylor. And
Second.
Did you want to say something, Don?
I would. All these wonderful things that people have said are all accurate and they resonate. But the other part, I don't remember anybody talking about Bruce's sense of humor, which is, you wouldn't expect it because he seems so professional and straight-laced, but every once in a while, he'll get that twinkle in his eye and a sly grin, and you know that something really special is going on. And I'm going to miss you, Bruce, for all those little tidbits, as well as for the brilliance that you brought to the job. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Saylor. And we know that more of that to come wherever you are headed and wherever you spend your time and talent in the future, Bruce. I heard somebody make a motion, but I didn't catch it. So Lynette, I'm not sure if you caught it. Or
I think it was Director Saylor making the motion. Is that right?
All right, and I'll second that motion and make that easy. Do we need to take can we do a aye. I don't think we need to do a roll call on this, do we? All right, so all those in favor with acclamation, let's all say aye.
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 And I'm sure there's no opposition, so motion carries. Bruce, I'm going to give you the floor for just a moment.
Everybody hear me? Yeah, good. Yeah, so thanks, first of all, for all the kind words. I do really appreciate it. For me, SACOG's always been that perfect blend of a challenging and ambitious work combined with like a strong connection to a place and community. SACOG's always been a place where talented and passionate and hardworking people gather. I've always believed that I could bring my talents to this place and commit 100% to using them in service of a big, worthwhile project or endeavor. I also knew that many other people with different talents and areas of expertise were doing the same, and were there ready to work with me. And I've worked around in both the public and the private sector long enough to know that combination is really rare and really valuable. And so I stayed, and am really proud of the work that this agency's done and my small part in doing that. Starting to thank people is always a slippery slope, but I sort of have to mention a few people, and bear with me for a second. So I want to start, these are people who over the course of my time at SACOG have really been influential and impactful in my work life and my career here. Gordon Gary, who hired me twice here, and at another time, maybe I can share how that happened. There's a story there for sure. Mike McKeever, he's somebody who challenged me several times to do things that I thought were impossible. Turns out they weren't. And Mike's genius was always to know that, and to know also how important those seemingly impossible things were. There's a couple other SACOGians who have recently moved on that I want to mention. Monica Hernandez. I always felt like she was a person who was in my corner. I learned so much from her over the years and really miss her already, but want to thank her. Matt Carpenter was also an invaluable collaborator and partner to me on so many different things at SACOG. In terms of like current people here, I want to thank my current team for the many years of hard work and partnership. And I'll start with Yeonmei Oh, who will be succeeding me in managing the data and analysis group here. Jeannie Hong and her data and mapping services team, Pete Atwood, Laura Bell, Warren Navarro, and then Kyle Shipley and his transportation modeling and analysis team, Darren Conley, Shenyi Gao, and Tina Glover. They're the best, and you're going to be in good hands even without me here for sure. I do appreciate the well-wishing and the thanks that you've all given me, but you're going to be in good hands moving forward. I also want to recognize and thank Kirk Trost for his mentorship, good advice, and guidance over the years. And I reflect back a lot of what he said to me in his kind remarks. Casey Lazan has been such a wonderful collaborator and supporter of my work. And I hope she's gotten from me the same amount of help that I've gotten from her. Eric Johnson has been such a great help and partner to me on so many things that I have little or no talent for. He's amazingly skilled and is so smart, and he's just been such a great person to have by my side, and I'll miss him for sure. And then James, I do truly appreciate the focus that you've brought to implementing SACOG's good plans. That's hard work, and I think you've rightly put a big focus on that in your time here, and I've really enjoyed and been very satisfied to be a small part of that over the last few years. And then board members, I'm looking through the remaining Zoom panel here, and Director Stallard goes way back to the 1990s with me, but I see others, Saylor, Sander, Joyner, Sue and many others that I've met over the years, a decade or more in some cases. But many of you I've never really met face to face, and I really regret that. It's one of the costs of this world that we're surviving through, and the remote work that we're doing, the remote meetings. I do regret sincerely the missed opportunity to actually meet you face to face, get to know you a little bit. But I do always get inspiration from the hard work that you do. All of you, most of you have day jobs as well as your elected office commitments. That's always an inspiration to me, no matter how much I work. I know that you're probably working harder on all corners. So always an inspiring example to me, and the staff that you have that I've been fortunate enough to work with over the years. It's been a great honor to do that too. But I do want to thank you especially for the time that you put into SACOG and being board members here, and the passion and the that you bring to that. And with that, I'll say so long.
Thank you very much. We're all gonna clap, really appreciate it. And thank you for just your dedication to SACOG, but to our communities. We really appreciate it. All right, folks, I want to give an update. I think what we're going to do is we're going to skip the advocacy report. We were going to have a federal advocacy report. And we all know there's lots going on with the infrastructure bills and funding that may or may not come forward. So, you know, we've got folks still working on that, but we're going to skip that item since we're going long today. And wanted to then move forward with any report outs. I don't have anything personally. I do believe, I think you're aware that we're in the process of the nominating committee. So thank you for those who are serving on that, and for those who have thrown their hats in the ring to serve as vice chair next year. So more to come on that. Are there any directors who would like to make a report out or a comment before we move over to James? Director Joyner.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Little bit awkward. We don't have a spot for board initiated business, so I think this is probably the best place for this. And James, I hope you've been given a heads up that this might be coming. Both EDCTC and PCTPA are having a bit of an issue with the Federal Highways Administration, and since this is not agendized, we can't go into great depth about that. But I do want to ask, both as a member of this board and as chair of PCTPA, I want to request that this board ask the executive director to make all efforts to assist PCTPA and EDCTC in preserving their ability to direct their own RSTBG, CMAQ, and all other federal and state funds, and to protect the integrity of our RTPAs in the state in accordance with the MOUs for both PCTPA and EDCTC. And James, I understand that you are working with those organizations and working towards a joint letter to ask for an extension. I very much appreciate that. And I hope that we can count on you and this board to support those efforts to preserve those abilities for both PCTPA and EDCTC. That's it, Chair.
Thank you, Director Joyner. Let's see, Director Thomas, and then Director Saragosa.
I would just like to second and thank Director Joyner for starting off that conversation, and just express how critical this is in El Dorado County. EDCTC has made tremendous strides in meeting local transportation needs with the ability to be, flexible and nimble and quick in working with SACOG, as well as working within the parameters of this federal funding, though, to meet local needs. So preserving local control is absolutely critical. And so I thank SACOG and James for supporting our effort to do that.
Thank you. Director Saragosa.
I'll be the tertiary person here as well, and echo Director Thomas and Director Joyner on those comments. And I want to thank SACOG staff and James, you for working with both Placer and El Dorado to kind of come up with a solution here and sending that letter to Caltrans. So thank you very much. We're looking to hopefully find a way to come to a good solution on this. So thanks again.
Thank you. Director Hadashelt.
Yeah, I just want to join the previous speakers and thanking Mr. Corliss and looking forward to a positive outcome from this. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other directors? All right. Appreciate the Director Saylor.
Just it'd be nice to know what the hell you're talking about. So maybe somebody can share that with us.
Especially when people use acronyms. James, do you want to explain it a little bit better? And we really appreciate, coming from these counties, that the effort that SACOG has put together with the transportation agencies of Placer and El Dorado counties. But James, I'll let you explain it a little bit. That will be helpful.
How to do this in 10 seconds or less, right? This is why we get paid the big bucks, because it's very complicated. Essentially, federal transportation funds, as Director Joyner just mentioned, two pots of funding in particular, long ago, back in the early 1990s, were sub-allocated, were pushed down to metropolitan regions. Going back to the mid 1990s, we've had an MOU with PCTPA and EDCTC that shares some of the funds that come to the metropolitan region to those two agencies. And you program through those two agencies, those transportation funds. And we believe we have a very good working relationship with your two agencies. You are close to the ground. You know your communities really well. And this issue did come up last year in our funding round. When we were talking about our 4-county funding round, we did flag this, and we did wonder at the time about the federal interpretation of the MOU we have with your two counties. So we're working through this. Basically, the Federal Highway Administration is giving the state a corrective action, not just us, to say it all has to get programmed at a 6-county level. You can't just kind of provide it on a population basis. So having said that, without going into too much more detail, right, we think this relationship is important, the way we've had this set up. Not that it shouldn't involve some examination about how we award projects, you award projects, and work together, but we are working very closely together. And I think, as Director Joyner just mentioned, we're just about to co-sign a letter among the three of us, the very least asking a delay. So this is us, it's the Bay Area, and it's Southern California also that are sort of caught up in this. It's hard to give this a very quick update and description, but it is important. We recognize that importance, and it's a very thin needle to thread, and so we're doing our best to thread that needle.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate that. Any other updates? James, do you have any updates before we?
Again, I hope you're getting those email updates. The one thing I would just flag is we did hold open the Youth Leadership Academy, YLA. So in your last, I think the applications are now due on Sunday, at the end of the day, Sunday. But please, if you can, we'd like to get, I think, a few more applications, get a bit more geographic diversity as well across our region. You know how important that Youth Leadership Academy is. And in fact, I want to thank Autumn Bernstein for actually showing us the next generation of the transit riders and youth leaders. So that is the world we're in Zoom. But those YLA applications are super important. So please, if you can do one thing the next 24 hours, if you haven't already, or maybe you have already, just resend this out. We've held the applications open. We'd love to get the numbers up. We'd love to get a very good cohort coming into our YLA Academy this coming year. So thanks in advance for that.
James, are there any regions that you would like us to focus on?
Tell you what, why don't I go back with staff and ask them maybe where we're a little short, and then you will get you'll get a direct request. Okay.
That would be great. And along with that, just make sure you include the flyer and the information.
Yeah.
That way directors can shoot it out away. That would be.
Yep. Thanks again.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate your digging in today. We will adjourn and look forward to seeing you at our next committee meetings. And I think we have a lunch on the 4th of November. So with that, have a great day and we'll see you all soon.
Good to see you.
Bye.